For many decades, we have heard of unidentified flying objects appearing in the sky or faint lights disappearing into the void. But what is even more frightening is that they not only fly across, but also descend, approach, and look straight at humans. Accidental collisions, uninvited visits, and even horrors that transcend all imagination, stolen memories, unspeakable lies, and returning shadows after days of separation bring with them a dreadful resistance to where they once were. And in the darkness, a question rises. Is it possible that aliens have come so close and left traces that cannot be erased? Bernay and Betty Hill. A nightmare on a white mountain road. September 1961. On an empty road in the middle of the mountains of the U.S. state of New Hampshire. Bernay and Betty Hill, a couple far away in the dark, were driving home from a vacation in Canada. It was already late. The winding road passed through a white mountain range, and all they could hear was the sound of a car engine and a small radio. And then they saw it, a light appeared in the sky. At first, they thought it was a star, then a plane. But the object kept wandering, then moving along with them, sometimes slowly, sometimes at an unexpected speed. Betty began to worry. Bernay stopped the car, used a binocular to observe, and panicked when he realized it was an object with a window, and inside were shapes looking straight at them. Bernay turned the car over and shouted to his wife. "We have to get out of here right now," but it was too late. The next memory the two remembered was when they got home. Their watch had stopped running, Bernay's rubber band was broken, Betty's dress was tightly fastened, and in their hearts was a vague confusion. So the worst thing had happened, but their minds did not allow them to remember. The nightmare really began in the following weeks. The two began to have similar nightmares, vague images of a white room, small creatures with big heads, black eyes without feelings, and strange medical tools used to examine their bodies. Too confused, the two went to Dr. Benjamin Simmons, an expert in rejuvenation. During the treatment, both Betty and Bernay remembered the horrific memories. They were taken on a ship, their bodies were torn apart, Betty was stabbed in the stomach, and Bernay was forced to lie motionless under the bright light. Betty also said that one of the creatures had shown her a map of the stars. She drew that map again later, and according to some researchers, it was extremely similar to the star system Zeta Reticuli, a half-star system about 39 light-years apart. At that time, the shocking events of the U.S. Congress did not surprise the two. They were ordinary, trustworthy citizens who did not look for fame. But their story, as well as the strange details, made the whole world face a terrible myth for the first time. Aliens not only existed. They also approached humans and chose to invade Japan. Since then, the names Bernay and Betty Hill have become a symbol of a completely new program in history, UFO, the origin of mysterious abductions, where the victim could not prove anything except the memory of never disappearing. Travis Walton. 5 days missing in space. On November 5, 1975, 6 men were working in a national forest. They were called NASA, Apache, Siegfried, in the state of Arizona. It was a group of woodworkers, working normally, nothing special, except a man named Travis Walton. He was the youngest of the group, enthusiastic and never believed in miracles, until the thing he had to go through that day. The sky was dark when the whole group got into the car and left the area. As they drove out of the forest, suddenly a bright light shone from above, through the trees. At first they thought it was a plane, but that light was still, silent, making a loud roar. And right above, a figure was lurking in the middle of the forest. The car stopped. Travis was attracted. He stepped down to get closer. His friends called out, but he still stepped up. Curiosity, shock, seemed to be blinded by the light, and then a green, white light came from under the ship. Travis was sucked into the air, as if his gravity had disappeared. His body fell to the ground and started. His friends panicked and ran away. Just a few minutes later, in fear and guilt, they returned, but Travis had disappeared. The search began right in the middle of the night. The police, helicopters, paramedics, went all over the area, but there was no sign of Travis. The press called this the most bizarre disappearance, Arizona. The police suspected that his group had killed Travis and built up a crazy story, but then, 5 days later, on the evening of November 10, Travis Guantern appeared at a gas station, about 50 kilometers away from the scene. He called for help in a panic. "They let me down, I think I'm crazy." He collapsed, exhausted, and completely confused. When he was taken for a checkup, there was no sign of a clear injury, but all the memories in his head were like pieces of broken glass. Gradually, Travis recalled what he remembered. He woke up in a bright room. Around him, there were small creatures with big black eyes. They didn't talk, but they controlled him in some way. Travis resisted and fell unconscious. When he woke up again, he saw himself surrounded by 3 people who looked like humans in uniform, but cold and silent. Then he fell unconscious and woke up on the side of the road. Travis's story shook the whole country. He and his friends went through a lie detector test and the results showed that they were not lying. To this day, no one can deny the truth and no one can give a reasonable explanation. Travis wanted to find the light, but the light chose him and led him in a way that no one could imagine. Pat Gunger, when he couldn't run away either. On October 11, 1973, in the town of Yen Vin, Pacaloca, in Mississippi, he suddenly entered history with one of the strangest alien kidnappings ever recorded. 2 men, Chuckler Hickson, 42, and Kenfield Parker, 19, were fishing by the river. The water was calm, there was no wind, no one was passing by, a normal evening, until a roar rang out and a blue beam of light fell to the water in front of them. Both looked up and they were as if dead. A 10-meter long hovered in the air just a few feet away from the ground. It didn't make a sound, just a constant beam of light that made the space look empty. Then everything happened so fast. A door opened, 3 creatures slipped out of the ship. They didn't move, they didn't touch the ground. They were taller than 1.5 meters, their bodies were gray, they didn't have eyes, they didn't have mouths or noses. Their hands were like claws, and their heads seemed to be pulled up with a height and shape. All the details were wrong with everything that was known on Earth. Chuckler and Calvin could not move, could not crawl, could not resist. Their bodies were completely paralyzed. Those creatures took them on board, not with physical strength, but with an invisible force as light as air, but they couldn't move. Inside the ship, Chuckler said he was taken to a room without a window. The light was cold and white. A device like a big eye flickered in front of him, it shone a light through the bodies. Calvin then said he couldn't remember much, his brain was covered with a layer of bones that didn't allow him to remember. When he woke up, both were lying on the sand, the missing ship was not visible. They came to the police station right in the middle of the night, confused and trembling. The police didn't believe them and decided to try to break in to leave them alone in the secret recording room. But instead of telling the story, the recorder recorded the gentle words of the 2 men, still trembling, unable to understand what had just happened, the next morning. The doctors did not find any signs of drunkenness or delirium. Both went through a lie detector test and the results showed they were telling the truth. Although the incident caused controversy many years later, the story of Chuck Lowe and Calvin has never been forgotten in Patacala. They didn't make any money, didn't write books, didn't go to the theater, they just wanted to forget. But that fear, once it appeared in their memory, nothing could stop it. And if what they told was the truth, then perhaps the scariest thing was not to be kidnapped, but to know that we could be chosen at any time, anywhere, with only one light. The streets were empty, the heat was unbearable. And 20 helicopters were silent. On the night of December 29, 1980, an empty street in the middle of Texas suddenly became the scene of a strange incident that the US government had to investigate. On that day, 3 people were driving together on an empty street to go home the next evening. The driver was Pedigas, a married woman. Sitting next to her was her best friend, Vicky Landrum, and behind her was Vicky's 8-year-old son, Convy. Suddenly, a flash of light flashed through the trees. In front of them, a giant object was shining brightly, swaying in the air, jumping like it was on fire, and making a strange sound like a metal screeching. The inside of the car was heating up. The windshield was heating up. In front of the object, the back was very low, and there were large flames heading straight down the road like a jet engine, causing the road to start running. Vicky stopped the car. Despite the fear, she stepped out of the car to observe. The temperature outside the car was extremely terrible, as if she was standing next to an open reactor. At that moment, another thing appeared. About 20 military helicopters were flying around the object. There was no signal, no alarm, only silence around it as if they were escorting, and then all the UFOs and helicopters flew away, disintegrating into the night. At first, the three of them only thought they had seen something strange, but only a few hours later, the horror really began. Betty was stripped of her skin, her head ached like a rag, her hair was tangled, and her hair began to look like a net. Vicky and Compy also had similar symptoms, although milder. Their skin was shiny, their eyes were sensitive, unusual with light. They went to the hospital, but no doctor could explain the cause. Betty was hospitalized for 3 weeks, suffering from similar symptoms such as acute pneumonia. But when her family asked the emergency services, all the doors were closed. There was no newspaper, there was no military activity that night, and of course, no unit took responsibility. They did not accept silence, and the three of them filed a lawsuit against the US government for compensation for the damage. But the case dragged on for many years, and was eventually dismissed for no reason. No concrete evidence was found to show military activities in the area at that time. No one could explain the heat that caused them to be stripped, no one found the helicopters, and no one knew what the shining object was, where it came from, or why it appeared at the same time as the flying team as it was designated earlier. The Landrum cut became one of the rare cases where a close contact with an object was not identified to leave a clear effect on the human body. Even after decades, the pain of the victim's body and mind has never faded. Because this time there was not only light, but also heat, metal, and those who were protecting it. Alagaz, the lights on the lake for 20 years no one dared to mention, until the summer of 1976, for art students, Kim, Jacques, Truck, and Charlie rode out in the middle of the Eagle Lake in Maine, North America. In the middle of a desolate natural landscape and a misty water surface. They only hoped to enjoy a relaxing night of fishing. In order not to be lost when returning home, they lit a big fire on the sand. The light from the blazing fire was the only thing to break the darkness around. No one expected that that light would become a sign for something that did not belong to this world. About midnight, 1 in 4 people looked up and suddenly froze. In the sky, a luminous object shimmering, completely silent. It did not flutter like a plane, nor did it follow any trajectory that could be predicted. It just stood there, looking down as if waiting, then it began to move. A beam of bright light streaked straight from the object to the lake, swept past a small bed. And then it moved closer, faster, closer, straighter. No one screamed, no one spoke, everyone just nodded their heads to the shore, while that light clung to their backs as if lurking. Just a few minutes later, they reached the shore, but when they turned around to look, that object was gone. Everything seemed to be over, but when they looked back at the fire that had been lit for less than half an hour, the fire had been put out. There were only a few small ashes left. It was completely unreasonable, no one felt that they had been out there for too long. But clearly, with the fire and only a few ashes left, they had been out for longer than they thought, and no one knew what had really happened in that space. After that night, they did not say anything to each other about what had just happened, did not argue, did not explain. It was just a strange silence in a room occupied by 4 people for many years. But inside them, something was still going on. It was a strange dream, images were falling from the bright room, the noise was unbearable, and the faces were not expressive. 20 years later, when they could not stand the repeated nightmares, they found a doctor who specializes in the treatment of mental retardation. And when each person was put into a deep state of retardation, the memory was broken like a broken glass. The 4 people who had not spoken before told the same experience. They were caught on a ship, they were tortured, they lay on a table, and the black-eyed creatures were silent, cold, examining each person. No one forced them to believe, they did not write a book, they did not make films, they did not look for fame, but they all told the same strange story. Alagad did not have to be a UFO sighting. It was a collective kidnapping with 4 people, 4 memories, but a story and a fear that no one could forget, Valenko, a remote village and unnamed creatures. In the morning of July 1, 1965, the small town of Valenco in the south of France was overcast with sunshine and fog. It was the harvest season, the season in which the farmers woke up very early. Among them, there was Mauri Marcy, a man who was silent, familiar with his land like a palm tree. At about 5 a.m., when Mauri was working on the field, he also heard a sound like a whistle, but not from the insects. It was a strange sound, thin and sharp, as if coming from the wind. When he looked up, he saw a strange object less than 100 meters away that was stepping down in the fog. That object, in the shape of a dragon, in a grayish metal, had 4 legs that were sinking very much like machines, and next to it were 2 small creatures. They were up to 1.3 meters tall, had unusual heads, big eyes, and wore something that looked like a bright, colorful outfit. Their actions were fast and precise. One of the 2 creatures held a device that looked like a small tube. Mauri stood still, not believing his eyes, and then the creature turned around, lifted the device, and he could no longer move. Mauri's body became stiff, as if frozen in the air. He was still conscious. He saw everything, felt the ground beneath his feet, but could not move at all. Those creatures were touching each other with sounds that did not sound like any language. Just a few seconds later, they turned around and stepped inside. The door closed, the object flew up gently, did not cause wind, did not cause the wings to move, and disappeared into the sky at an unimaginable speed. Mauri stood still for a while before feeling his body slowly loosen. He sat down on the ground, sweating cold, running back and forth, unable to understand what had just happened. However, that was not the strangest part. At the place where the object landed, the ground was pressed down into 4 small circles, like a machine's feet running deep into the ground. Grass and moss surrounding the crevice did not cause it. Many years later, that area still could not grow back to normal. The ground turned gray, the flowers did not bloom anymore. Mauri was not a storyteller, but after some neighbors came to see the scene, his stories began to spread throughout France. Scientists were invited, meteorologists, military, local police, all admitted that the signs on the ground were real. And Mauri's statement did not change, although only one detail was asked dozens of times. Valencia was not a place where people expected something supernatural. But in the middle of the desert, in a peaceful morning, a normal farmer faced something he could not call a name: Virginia, a shining light that did not belong to this world. On January 20, 1996, in the city of Virginia, in Brazil, 3 young girls aged 14 to 22 were walking through an empty land near where they lived. The sky was gloomy, the air was damp after the rain, and everything seemed very normal until they saw it. A few meters away, next to the cement wall, was a strange creature. It was small, short, shiny brown skin like rubber. Big eyes, dark red. 2 long arms touched the knee, high heels, and a few bumps on the head like a horn. It was sitting, breathing, and seemed scared. The 3 girls were so scared that they screamed and ran. When they told their mother, the family immediately returned to the land, but the creature had disappeared. Strangely, only a few hours later, the surrounding area began to be blocked. Witnesses said they saw the Brazilian military car moving quickly that way, and not long after, some armored vehicles left the scene. The rumor spread widely. Some said they saw soldiers carrying something covered in a black sheet. Others said they saw another creature captured and taken to the city hospital, where medical staff were then transferred for urgent work. Last but not least, a police officer was said to have participated in the capture of the creature and was seriously injured and died just a few weeks later due to an infectious disease. His family believed he had been in direct contact with the creature and had to pay the price. The authorities denied everything. They said what the 3 girls saw was just an innocent person sitting by the wall. As for the military, they said it was just an act. But there is one thing that no one can deny. The chaos in Virginia is real. In the following days, many people said they saw strange objects in the sky. Some even captured images of strange lights appearing behind the mountains near the city. And most of all, the crowd of witnesses, from 3 girls, truck drivers to hospital staff, was something that the investigation could not easily ignore. So far, no clear evidence has been released, but in Brazil, the Gajinha case is considered one of the closest encounters that ever happened in South America, where the government, the military and the witnesses seem to have seen it, but never saw it. Perhaps that creature did not come to attack. Maybe it just fell down, got lost and was held as a secret that needed to be buried, but for those who witnessed it, that secret never left their minds. The story ends here. See you again in the next videos on the channel.